Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1101 continues the Kuma and Bonney flashback, and while we've been getting a lot of answers over the past few weeks, this one ends with some big questions. If you hadn't noticed, I'm back after a month or so of dealing with copyright claims on some of my videos, preventing me from uploading, which has unfortunately slowed down the channel a lot amongst YouTube's algorithm. If you'd like to support the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribed. It helps the channel grow and get back on track. With that said, let's get into Chapter 1101 to Bonney. We pick back up where 1100 left off, with Kuma arriving on Dawn Island, the home of a 16-year-old Monkey D. Luffy, a year before he would set sail and start his journey. This means the final page of Chapter 1100 brings this flashback to roughly 3 years ago. Kuma comes across Luffy and looks at him training from afar and thinks back to a time when he was with the revolutionaries. During a visit to the Goa Kingdom, Kuma noticed how familiar Dragon was with the country and how he would look over a young boy on the edge of the country. This is of course in reference to Windmill Village, Luffy's hometown. This exchange between Dragon and Kuma fills us in on how Kuma was aware that Luffy was Dragon's son all the way back during the Thriller Bark arc, something that not even Ivankov was aware of. Eva had a similar exchange with Dragon when asking about his family back on Baltigo, to which Dragon was similarly cold. So if Kuma was aware of Luffy being Dragon's son this far back in time, then why was he so ready to take out the Straw Hats back on Thriller Bark? Well, the exchange between Vegapunk and Kuma later on in this chapter may give us an answer. Vegapunk explains that Kuma will be forced to follow any given order regardless of how severe it may be, such as killing a child. However, he will have free will to some extent before the procedure is fully complete, and this here may be the key. Recall that Kuma's procedure was only finished a few days before Marineford, meaning he still had some autonomy left during the time of Thriller Bark. So while Kuma was given orders and agreed to carry them out, he still had some capacity to change his actions. We saw this when he offered to spare the crew in exchange for Luffy's head, and then eventually settled on Zoro's, even thinking that Zoro actually died, as evidenced by his surprise at seeing Zoro alive on Sabaody. This act of kindness by Kuma could be seen as him paying back Dragon for helping him find a cure for Bonney. Both of them being fathers, they would understand the lengths they would go to save their child. Luffy is here practicing his Gum Gum axe, a move that we first saw used on the Baratie. Back then, Viz translated this technique as the Gum Gum Battle Axe, but it seems they've reverted to its original name. He mentions how he'll use this technique to protect his crewmates. This is of course exactly what would happen during the Arlong Park arc, as Luffy would use the Gum Gum axe to take out Arlong and save Nami. Behind him, a crocodile and tiger cower in fear. Recall that just 9 years prior, Luffy would be the one terrified by these very animals, but through his years of training, he would be able to overpower these beasts with ease. Luffy mentions that he doesn't eat weaklings like them, showing his growth from his days of feasting on crocodiles as a kid. A few years later actually, Luffy would once again train against various beasts, but this time on Ruskaina Island, where the animals were of humongous proportions. Among them would also be tigers and crocodiles, who Luffy would deem unsuitable for eating as he had overpowered them and befriended them. One quick note, there may be a small mistake here as Luffy's hat didn't have the strap until the Alabasta arc. It being easily removed was a point of tension throughout the early parts of the series, but that's not a huge detail. As I had hoped, Kuma's orders from the world government were completely unrelated to Luffy, instead instructing Kuma to take out some unnamed pirates that were causing issues in the area. But before carrying these orders out, he makes sure to help the victims. In my last breakdown, I talked about how Bonney was so surprised at seeing a pirate helping out civilians, and how her comments felt contradictory despite her knowing at the time that Kuma was a pirate himself. Well, lo and behold, Kuma here does the same thing that Zoro did by going as far as taking the wounded to the hospital. You can tell a good amount of time has passed as the moon has risen by the time he manages to deal with the actual pirates, which just goes to show Kuma's commitment to helping the civilians. He continues to write letters to Bonney as dawn arrives. Later in this chapter, Bonney would be able to walk under the sun, and I can't help but point out how the sun meeting the clouds at the horizon here resembles a straw hat, with the negative space of the clouds in front of the sun resembling the red band that runs across it. Over on Sorbet, it seems Alpha has been keeping all of Kuma's letters from Bonney, but with Bonney having seen Kuma's memories, at least she now knows that he wrote her all this time. We first saw Bonney beat up Gyogyo a few years ago in chapter 1099, but it seems they've continued to train throughout this time, explaining Bonney's combat prowess in the present day. Bonney seems to have gotten more control over her Devil Fruit abilities now as well, with her being able to use her Distorted Future technique by this point to assume a form similar to the one we saw earlier in the Egghead arc when she was with Vegapunk. We've seen her use this before as well, though unnamed at the time when she aged Luffy, and we'll see it again later in the chapter. Speaking of, roughly a year has passed since Kuma and Bonney first met Vegapunk, and it seems Egghead's construction into what it is today is halfway done, with the Fabrio phase complete. Notice though that the island AC has yet to be be installed, as the climate is still that of a winter island. Vegapunk reminds us that Egghead employs various holograms, a plot point that I've been wanting to come back in the main story. Punk Record seems to be operational, with Vegapunk having his antenna installed, meaning the flashback we saw earlier in this arc between Kuma and Vegapunk can now be narrowed down to having happened within a year before the start of the series. We see Stussy with Vegapunk and Kuma here. Recall that Stussy was very familiar with the island, much to Lucci's surprise earlier in this arc. While this is taking place 3 years ago, it seems that she may have not been telling the whole truth by saying she hadn't been here in ages, since she was aware of the Frontier Dome and the satellites, inventions that seemingly were not invented yet. So she must have either visited again afterwards or continued contact with Vegapunk since. She wonders who has it worse between her and Kuma, with Kuma on his way to lose his free will and her being a clone, though Vegapunk reassures her humanity, a belief that he had even way back during her creation with Mads. Back on Sorbet, enough time has passed for it to be Bonney's 9th birthday. Among the celebrants are the kids from 4 years ago that bullied Bonney. It's interesting that this has happened across 2 generations, with Gyo-Gyo and his friends eventually becoming Kuma's allies all those years ago, and now these kids befriending Bonney. I can't help but think of Mihawk's assessment of Luffy's abilities to create allies wherever he goes. But either way, they all celebrate with a giant pizza, which was said to be Bonney's favorite food back in the SBS. Speaking of the SBS, we actually got Bonney's birth date in the SBS as well, September 1st, which means we can narrow down the time period of this flashback even further. Bonney would be fully healed about 6 months after this point, which would mean around March, bringing us within half a year of the start of the series. And this works out because we know Luffy waited until he turned 17 to set sail, possibly even on the very day of his 17th birthday on May 5th, which would be 2 months after Bonney set sail. There is some wiggle room, of course, with a few months worth of a window, but even so, it's pretty interesting to see that Bonney may have set sail not too long before Luffy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 6 months pass from Bonney's 9th birthday, and she looks to be fully cured, as Vegapunk had said. However, Alpha and the world government need to keep her hostage for another half year, since that's how long it would take Kuma to fully undergo his procedure. The townsfolk grow suspicious, and we learn that Connie figured out that Alpha was actually a government agent from overhearing them while drinking, something that reminded me a lot of Kokoro assessing CP9's existence back during the Water 7 arc in Blue Nose Bar. She pushes Bonney to escape and find Kuma with the help of Gyo-Gyo and his friends, speaking highly of their capabilities, which had to be true given how the Bonney pirates were able to become a supernova crew so fast. As many suspected, Bonney escapes by switching places with Connie. The outfit she would have pre-time skip consists of Connie's hat and jacket, along with the white t-shirt and suspenders that Bonney had been wearing during this period of the flashback. I also think it's kind of funny that she assumes Connie's form when she tries to con someone else. Pretty cute if intentional. She runs towards Gyo-Gyo as well as Tots and Potato, which I'm assuming are the names of the other 2 friends that we've seen throughout this flashback, and they set sail in a fishing boat decorated to look like Bonney's favorite food. This is of course an early version of the Jewelry Margarita, the ship used by the Bonney pirates. We first saw a glimpse of it during the Marineford arc, but we would get it in full in volume 10,089, the accompanying volume for the film One Piece Stampede. You'll notice that it lacks a few things, such as the figurehead as well as the Jolly Roger that would come later. The current Jolly Roger actually seems to be that of Gyo-Gyo's, with the fish and crossbones, as we had seen it earlier in this chapter on his jacket. Alpha is enraged by this and chases down the ship with the moonwalk technique, something that Gyo-Gyo instantly recognizes as one of the 6 powers. Looks like Connie was right that he's not the average fisherman after all. But Bonney leaps forward and uses her distorted future technique, recalling a memory of Kuma describing Nika's appearance. She takes the form of what she imagines Nika to be like, delivering a punch to Alpha's face that very much resembles Gear 3rd. Now, I know a lot of people may think that Bonney's fruit is duplicating the abilities of the Gum Gum fruit here, and I've seen some think that she can use her distorted future to mimic potential futures where she has other devil fruits. I personally don't think this is the case. To me, this just seems like she's aging into an alternate future based on her idea of what Nika would be physically, not necessarily copying any devil fruit abilities. Her arm flexes and you can see the bulging veins, characteristics that are not usually present when Luffy's inflating his arms with air, which leads me to think these are her actual muscles and not just some rubber inflated body. Either way, I'm extremely curious to find out more, as the HH fruit has been incredibly fascinating. This does tell us though that Kuma was aware of Nika's rubber body in the past, which adds some more context to the first few pages of the chapter. And if so, does that mean he visited Dawn Island to check up on Luffy? Did Kuma know that Luffy possessed the abilities of Nika this entire time? Just when we thought we were getting answers, there are so many more questions. Now, there is a break next week, so we won't be getting them addressed anytime soon, but I can't wait to get back into the next one. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments if there's anything that you wanted to talk about in this chapter that I missed. This flashback has been incredible, and I love hearing what you all think. Once again, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.